In this tutorial, I will show you how to create this procedural buffalo plaid fabric material in Blender. And then after we create the procedural material, I'll show you how to join the material together into this custom node group with all of these different sliders. So we have the overall scale of the texture, then we have the different colors, so we have color 1, 2, and 3. Then we also have just the weave scale, so that's just going to scale the texture of the little weaves there for the fabric. And then we also have the checker scale just to change the size of the checkers. Then we also have this really cool checker noise, so you can turn this up if you want the edges to be more noisy. And then we also have the sheen value because the sheen makes materials look more like fabric, and then the roughness and also the bump strength. If you'd like to purchase this material and help support the channel, you can get that on my Gumroad store, links in the description, and also you can get access to this material by joining my Patreon page. If you'd like to purchase more of my materials, you can also check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack. And my Ultimate Material Pack comes with all of my procedural materials, pre-set up in Blender's asset browser, with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. You can also check out my procedural material packs if you'd like to purchase packs of 10 materials, and if you'd like to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, then you can check out my procedural material playlist here on YouTube. Alright, so real quick, I am going to show you what I have set up in the 3D viewport if you want to set it up the same way that I have. So I'm going to be doing a very basic cloth simulation, and if you'd like to learn the basics of cloth physics for beginners, then I have a complete tutorial on cloth physics. You can check that video out with the links in the description. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go here to Mesh, and I'm just going to add a UV sphere, and then I can shade this object smooth. Then I'm also going to press Shift A, let's go to Mesh and add a plane, and I can bring the plane up. I'm now going to scale the plane up, and I'm going to scale it up by 2.5, and then hit enter. And that way it's a little bit bigger, and we're going to be dropping the cloth on this sphere. I'm also going to press Ctrl A and apply the scale, so this is now the object's new default size. So I'm now going to go into edit mode, and then using the object context menu, I'm going to hit the subdivide button. And then right above me on the little subdivide settings, right after you subdivide this, I'm going to turn the number of cuts to 100. And that way it is very high detail, and the cloth physics now have lots of geometry to work with. Now before I actually simulate the cloth, it is very important that you've UV unwrapped the object, because we want the procedural texture to move along with the shape of the cloth, and so in order to do that, we're going to need to use the UV mapping to place the procedural textures on the object. So you can click right over here on the UV editing layout, and you can see the default plane was already UV unwrapped, so you can probably just leave it like that. If you need to, you can press the U button and then unwrap. And you can also check out my UV unwrapping for beginners tutorial with the link in the description if you'd like to learn more about UV unwrapping. But the default UV unwrap of this plane will be great for this material. So I can go back over here to the layout. So we can now add the cloth physics by clicking right over here on the physics properties. So on the plane, I'm going to add the cloth physics, and then if I click on the sphere, I'm going to add the collision physics. And this way the plane is going to interact with the sphere. Then also on this plane, I'm going to scroll down here, and there are a bunch of different settings that you can learn about in my cloth physics for beginners tutorial, but I'm just going to go down here and I'm going to check mark the self collision. This way the cloth will collide with itself and it'll look a bit more realistic. So I'm just going to press the space bar to play the timeline, and we're just going to let the cloth physics simulate. You can see it is a little bit laggy, but we'll just wait for that to finish. And if it's acting very laggy, you could also bake the simulation. So right up here, you can see that there is a cache tab, and so you can choose a simulation start and end, and then you could bake the simulation if you want to. But I'm just going to play it here. It is kind of laggy, but I will just wait until it is finished. All right, and I'm going to stop it right about there, a little after 100. So there's the simulation. So I can now just apply this. So to apply it, I'm going to go here to the modifier properties, and you can see it's been added as a modifier. So I can click on the drop down and click on apply. And then I also just want to select the sphere here, and right over here on the collision, I can click on this button, and this is going to jump us over to the physics properties, and I can just click on the X to get rid of the collision. So I can now select this object here, the cloth object, and using the object context menu, I will shade it smooth. Now when you're modeling to the real life scale in Blender, the default primitive shapes are a little bit higher than the average human, so these objects are actually quite big. So I'm just going to select both of these objects, and I'm going to scale them by 0.1 and then hit enter. And I can just bring this down more into the center. So now this object is maybe around the size of a towel. And I will also press Ctrl A and apply the scale. So this is now the object's new default size. And then I do want to add some modifiers to make the cloth look a bit nicer. So if you go here to the modifier properties, let's click on add modifier. And I can start by adding the solidify modifier. And I'm just going to make the thickness very small, just something like that. So now the cloth has a little bit of thickness. And then also I'm going to click on add modifier, and I'm going to add the subdivision surface modifier. And this will subdivide it so it looks much higher quality. And then I also added a camera, and I just pointed the camera at the objects. Now for the lighting, I added these two area lights right here. And on both of these area lights, I turned the shape to rectangle, and then I scaled them up just so that they kind of give some nice rim lights to the edge of the fabric. And then I also gave them a power of 50, and I turned the color to a slight blue color. And then also right over here on the world properties, to get some nice realistic world lighting, I added in this Machine Shop 02 HDRI. So this is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com. Link will be in the description if you'd like to download it. And then what you can do is add a new world, and here on color, you can click on the yellow dot, and you can choose environment texture, and then you can click on the open button and open up the HDRI. And again, I downloaded the 1K HDR version on Polyhaven. And then if you want to make the background transparent, what you can do is click right here on the render properties, and you can open up the film tab, and you can check mark the transparent button just so that the background is transparent. And also if you open up the color management, I'm going to be using the view transform of filmic and also the look to high contrast just to make things more contrasty and kind of pop out the colors. So we can now go right over here to the shading workspace. So in the shading workspace, I have the 3D viewport right over here in the rendered mode, and I'm just going to select this object here, and then over in the shader editor I can click on new to add a new material. And then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on to preview the different nodes. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can go to edit and go to the preferences, and then over there on the add-ons tab just search for Node Wrangler and checkmark the Node Wrangler add-on. So to start off, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to add a wave texture. Let's just drop the wave texture here. And then using the feature, the Node Wrangler, you can hold down the Control and Shift key and select different nodes, and that is going to preview the node on the object. Now with the wave texture selected, I'm also going to press Ctrl T, that's using another feature of the Node Wrangler, and this is going to add the texture coordinate mapping. Now it's going into the vector, and the vector is basically telling it how the wave texture is going to be placed on the object. Now for many procedural materials, I use the object coordinates because that works really well, but if we use the object coordinates for this fabric, it's not going to really look correct because this fabric is all curvy and it's rotated. And I want the weave of the fabric and the texture of the fabric to go along with the rotation of the cloth. And so this is why I'm using the UV mapping instead. So here on the texture coordinate, we can take the UV and we can put that into the vector. And then this mapping node is going to be used to change the location, rotation, and scale of the entire material. So now let's change some of the wave texture settings. So I'm going to turn the scale down to 2, and then I also want to turn the detail to 0 because I don't actually want any detail. And then I will leave the other settings at the default. Now, as well as having a texture which is going up and down, I also want a texture which is going back and forth. So I'm going to select the wave texture, and I'm going to press Ctrl Shift D. So Ctrl Shift D is going to duplicate the node, but it'll keep the wires plugged up. So I now want to Control Shift and select this wave texture to preview it. Now this wave texture I want to be going in the opposite direction, so let's click on the X here, and I can change this to Y instead. So now we have one going back and forth and up and down. So now that we have these two wave textures, I want to join them together into one texture. But before I do that, I do want to make the edges look a little bit rough and make it look a little bit like fabric. So I'm going to add a noise texture, and I'm going to use the noise texture to distort the edges of those waves. So I'll press Shift A, I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for a noise texture, and let's just drop the noise texture up here. And then I actually want to bring the texture coordinate and mapping back, and then what I'm going to do is hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to right click and drag over these two wires and then let go. That is going to add a reroute, and so now we just have one wire here that we can put the noise texture into. So let's drop the noise texture here in between the mapping and the reroute, and then this reroute is going into both vectors. So now the noise texture is going through the vector, and so it's distorting the placement of the wave textures, and so it looks really distorted. So let's now change some of the noise texture settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to 1, and then I will turn the detail all the way to the max of 15, so it is very detailed. And I'm also going to turn the roughness up to 1, and that way it is even more detailed. Now that is of course not what we want. It kind of looks like some sort of rusty metal texture, and so what I want to do is just have the noise texture have less control over the vector. So I basically want the noise texture to be less strong. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the mix node. Let's drop the mix node up here, and then I want to click on this float value, and I want to change this to color instead. And then I can drop the mix after the noise texture. So I now want to take the color of the noise texture and I want to put that into value B. And then I want to take the mapping vector and I want to put that into color A. So now this factor is going to blend between using A or using B. And so I can drag back and forth. You can see it's not distorted at all, but then as I turn it up, it's being more and more distorted by the noise texture. Now when I do this, you can see that it's moving around a lot. You can see those black lines are kind of moving around. So I'm going to click on the mix here and I'm going to change this to a linear light. This way I can drag it around and it's going to distort the edges, but it's not going to move those waves around. Now I want to make the factor very small, so I'm going to turn the factor to a value of 0.01, just a 0.01. So now if I zoom in here, you can see it is just a little bit distorted on the edges. Now before I join the two wave textures together into one texture, I do want to sharpen them because right now you can see they don't really look like the buffalo plaid fabric. The black waves are very small, and then there's kind of like this gray area right here before the little white area. So what I'm going to do is press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a math node, and let's stick the math node right up here. And I can Control Shift and select the math node to preview it. Now right here, if you click on the type, I want to change this to the greater than, and it's under the comparison, so change it to greater than. Then I want to take the color from this wave texture, and I'm going to put that into the top value, and then the threshold you can leave at 0.5. So basically the greater than is sharpening up the values. If I Control Shift and select the color ramp, you can see it's just kind of black, and then it kind of has this kind of gray area. But then if I Control Shift and select the greater than, it's taking any of those gray areas and it's making it fully black, and then where it's white, it's making it fully white. So it's basically sharpening up those edges. So I can take this greater than, I can press Shift D to duplicate it, drop it down here, and then I can take the wave texture color, and we can put that into the same one, so put it into the value. So now I can Control Shift and select between these, and we have the two different waves. So I now want to join them both together. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I can search for a mix node. Let's drop this down here, and I can click on the float, and let's change this to color instead. And then I want to take the first value here from the greater than, and I want to put that into value A, and then let's take the second value, and I can put that into B. So now you can see we are mixing them together, and it's starting to look like that buffalo plaid fabric. Now it's just white and black right now, so I want to make some different colors. So to make the different colors, I first want to add some color ramps, and we're going to use the color ramps to control which values are going to be the different colors. And then to create the different colors, we're going to be using some mix nodes. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I can search for a color ramp, and let's put the color ramp here after the mix. So I first want to create a value which is only this really black square here. So to do this, I'm going to click on the white tab and I'm going to drag this over. And you can see as I drag it over, it's making it more contrasty. So now we can just see that black square. And specifically, I'm going to put this white tab at a position of 0.44. So that is the first value, but I want to create another value. So I'm going to click on this color ramp and I'm going to press Control Shift D, and I will just bring it up here and stick it there. And then I can Control Shift and select this color ramp to preview it. So on this color ramp, I actually want to leave this white tab at the same value of 0.44, but I'm going to click on this and I'm going to make it fully black. Then I can click on the other black tab and I can instead make this one fully white, and then I actually want to drag it over here so it's on the opposite side. So now we have some white squares and some gray squares and some black squares. So now I can make the different colors by using mix nodes, and we can mix them together. So I'll press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I want to search for a mix node. And let's drop the mix down here. And then I want to click on the float here, and I want to change this to color because we're working with color values. So I can now take the bottom color ramp and I'm going to put the color into the factor. And the factor is going to control where it's going to be color A and where it's going to be color B. So I can control Shift and select the mix to preview it. So let's take color A and we're going to make that fully black. But then here on color B, I want that to be the dark red color of the buffalo plaid fabric. And if you want to use the same exact dark red color on color B, you can go to the hex and you can punch in a hex value of 4E100E, and then A will be fully black. So I now want to add this color ramp into the other colors, and then we're going to add the light red. So I can click on this mix, I can press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's stick it here after the first one. So now I want this color ramp here, I want that to be going into the factor, and again the factor is controlling where it will be color A and where it will be color B. So then here on the mix we can put the result into color A. So then color B can be the light red. So I'm going to make it a red color, and then I'm going to make it much brighter. And if you want to use the same color that I'm using for the light red here on color B, you can punch in a hex value of CC2F2A. And there we go, so now we have the texture of the buffalo plaid fabric. So we can now take the result and we can put that into the base color of the principled shader, and I can control Shift and select the principled shader. And let's just bring these nodes up here. So that is looking very cool, although it is looking way too shiny and cloth usually isn't that shiny. So let's take the roughness and I'm going to turn that up to like a 0.7. And then also to make it look more like fabric, let's turn the sheen all the way up to 1, and the sheen tint I will turn that up to 1 as well. And the sheen will make it look a bit more soft and make it look a bit more like fabric. So now I want to create the weave texture, and I want to put the weave texture into the normal to give it some bump. So back over here, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search, and we can search for another wave texture. Let's drop the wave texture down here, and then I can control Shift and select it to preview it. I want this mapping node to be able to control the entire scale of the material. So I want to take the vector of the mapping, and I want to put that into the vector of this wave texture. And then let's change some of the settings of the wave texture. So right here on this X, I want to change this to Y, so it's going the opposite direction. And then I want the weaves to be very small, so let's turn the scale up really high to like 300. And then I do want to add some more detail, so let's turn the detail to the max of 15. And then I do want some distortion because I do want the weave texture to be a little bit random, so let's turn the distortion value to 7. And now you can see it looks a bit more random. Now I also want some weaves which are going the opposite direction. So I'm going to select the wave texture and I will press Ctrl Shift D, and let's drop it down here. So when you press Ctrl Shift D, that'll duplicate the node but keep the wires plugged up. And then I can Control Shift and select this wave texture. And on this one, I want to click on the Y and I want to turn it back to X. So now you can see we have two weaves going in opposite directions. So I now want to make these weaves more contrasty before we join them together. So I'll press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I can search for a color ramp, and let's stick the color ramp here after the wave. And then I want to drag the black tab over, and you can see it's going to make it more contrasty if I drag that over. And I'm just going to drag the black tab to about here. Then I can click on the color ramp, I can press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's take this other wave texture and I can put that into this color ramp. So now we have two weave textures and I want to join them together. So I can actually just select one of these mix nodes and I can press Shift D to duplicate, drop it down here, and then I can take the color ramp, let's put that into A, and then the other color ramp and I can put that into B. And then I can Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. Now this factor is going to blend between using color A and color B, but I actually want to leave it at 0.5, and that way it's kind of evenly blending between them. So now we have this really nice fabric weave texture. So I can now put this into the normal to give it some bump. So let's take the result and I can put that into the normal, and then I can Control Shift and select the principled shader. Now you can see there's some weird shading issues and it's not working properly, but that's because this is normal data and then this is is color data. This is a yellow dot, so it's color data, but then this purple dot is normal data. So to convert the color data into normal data, I can press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I can search for the bump node, and let's put the bump node in between the mix and the normal. And then I want the mix to be going into the height value. And now it actually is converted to normal data, so it's all bumpy. But that is a little bit too strong, so I want to make it a bit less strong. So let's just turn the strength to like a 0.3. And that is it. So that is the procedural Buffalo Plaid fabric. So we can now join this together into a custom node group. So what I'm going to do is click and drag just to box select all the nodes except the material output, and then I can press Control G. Control G will join it together into a node group, and then I can press the tab key to go out of the node group. And I'm just going to drag this up here. I'm going to zoom way in, and I can also drag this out to make it bigger, and then I can make it the same name as the material. So I'm going to copy the name of the Buffalo Plaid fabric, and I'm going to paste that here into this node group. So now it's called Buffalo Plaid fabric. I can now press the tab key to go into the node group, and if I press the N key, that'll open up the side panel, and I can click right over here on group. So we now have inputs and outputs, and here on the outputs, I'm just going to rename this to shader just because personally I like that a bit better. But you can really rename this to whatever you want, or you can leave it at the BSDF. So now right over here we have this group input, and so we can put all the values into the group input to create all of the custom values. So the first value that I want to add is the overall scale of the entire material. So let's take the scale from the mapping and we can put that into the group input. And then right here, if you click on the scale, I want to make this one single value. So if we click here on type, instead of it being vector, I can change it to float instead, and that way it'll be one single value. Now if I tab to go out of the node group, we just need to turn the scale back to 1, which is the default, and now we can just change the scale, and that'll change the size of the entire material. So let's tab to go back into the node group. So the next values that I want to add are the color values. So I'm going to drag the group input over here, and then I can put this color here into the socket. I can also take this red color, put it into the socket, and then the black value, I can put that into the socket. And then right over here, we can click on these to rename these. So I'm going to rename these to color 1, and also color 2, and color 3. So the next value that I want to add is the weave scale. So right over here, we have the wave textures here, these two bottom wave textures, and we can use the scale values to control the scale of the weave. So let's take the scale from this first one, and I'm going to stick this into the extra socket here. And then if I double click on this to rename it, I can just rename it to weave scale. And then I want to take this other wave texture and I want to put the same scale value into the same socket here. And this way, this single weave scale is going to change the scale of both of these wave textures at once. And then I also want to add the checker scale. So let's drag this back over here, and this wave texture here and this wave texture here, this is controlling the scale of the checkers. So let's take the scale, I can put that in here, and then we want to take the scale from this other wave texture and we want to put that into the same socket. And then if I drag this down to make it bigger, I can rename this to checker scale. And then I thought it would also be cool to add the checker noise. So we can take this factor right here and we can put the factor into the extra socket here, and then I can rename this to checker noise. And so if I tab to go out of the node group, this checker noise is going to make the edges more and more noisy of those squares. Let's go back into the node group. Now I also want to add the sheen. So right over here, if you go to the principled shader, I can take the sheen value. Let's pull this out, drag it over here, and I can stick it in here for the sheen. Let's also add the roughness. So back over here on the principled shader, I can drag the roughness value. Let's drag this over, and I can stick it in here for the roughness of the material. And then the last value that I want to add is the bump strength. So we can take the bump node here, let's pull out a wire from the strength, and I can drag this over here, and we're going to stick it right up here to the final socket. And then if I click on this to rename it, I can just rename it to bump strength. So we can now tab to go out of the node group. So there we go. There is the finished procedural material with all the custom values. So just to recap, we have the overall scale of the entire material. Then we also have the different colors. So color 1, 2, and 3. We then just have the weave scale. So to actually see this taking effect, I could turn it way down to like 10. You can see there's the actual weave, but I want to leave it very big at 300 because it should be very small. Then we also have just the checker scale to make the checkers bigger or smaller. And then we also have this cool ripple checker noise, so we can make the edges of those squares more noisy. Then we also have the sheen value to make it look more like cloth. We also have the roughness, and then finally the bump strength of those weaves. So there is the finished procedural material. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to help support my channel and purchase this material, then you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links in the description. And if you'd like to purchase all of my procedural materials, then definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack. And my Ultimate Material Pack has all of my procedural materials pre-set up in Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. You can also check out my procedural material packs if you'd like to purchase packs of 10 materials, and if you'd like to learn how to create all of my procedural materials, you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. But I hope you found this helpful, and thank you for watching.